Heyo, it's me, Lucky B4stard. And today we're again taking a deep dive into the meta landscape of Elden Ring. Today with Intelligence. This is my 125 meta level Intelligence build. In part 1 I was showcasing my Strength build, and then I even made a part 1.5 in order to get all the content I made out there. Another Strength build showcase. And it's also going to be the case for the Int build. I will also make another part for the second half of this build showcase. If I put it all in one video, it would just be too long. And after that, I will also make a build showcase for a 125 Dex and Faith build. I also already recorded tons of footage for those two, so it's just a matter of making videos out of them. Unfortunately, I'm not a full-time YouTuber, so I can't work on videos all the time. If you want to help me change that at some point in the future, then please subscribe to the channel, especially if you enjoy my videos. Okay, now with all that being said, let's explore what makes the Int build the most intelligent of all builds at meta level. If you took a look at the build on the left side of the screen, I guess you probably already know what I'm talking about. It's the intelligence stat. Unlike in real life, you can increase your intelligence by killing monsters and enemies and spending your runes on your intelligence stat. It's your main damage stat as mage. It scales every intelligence-based damage, which means also every staff that is used for casting magic, with rare exceptions. Therefore, it directly increases the damage you are able to deal with int-based spells. It's also the requirement for spells, so if you want to cast a very high-level spell, you will need a lot of intelligence to do that. So that means if you want to know how high you should push this stat, I would say push it as high as you can at your level cap, and at least take a look at the spells that you want to use, because if you want to use some of those specifically high intelligence spells, like Renala's Full Moon and stuff, you will need a lot of intelligence in order to make that happen. Intelligence is one of those builds that can be very specialized. Some intelligence builds are pure casters, they only ever use cast magic and only use staffs, no weapons, and therefore they will also be able to put more points into intelligence. My personal approach to this mage is rather a close combat focused one. Me personally, I just like the Souls combat and I don't really like spamming spells. To me personally, shooting a spell and hoping for somebody to get hit by it just doesn't feel as rewarding as having this close combat kind of dance where you dodge attacks and you trick your enemy into not dodging your attack. But it's just my personal preference. This preference, however, leads to my mage build having quite a lot of investment in dex and strength. Obviously it's not a lot compared to a dex or a strength build, but it is enough to wield the Moonlight Greatsword, which is a strength requirement of 16, and also 18 dex, which is enough to wield the Moonveil Katana. Depending on how you want to play your mage, if you want him to be rather spell focused or close combat focused, you will also balance your endurance and your mind. Those are the stats for your stamina and your FP, which is basically your magic stamina, if you want to put it like that. The blue bar. If you plan on casting a lot of expensive spells, you will need a lot of mind. And last but not least, the stat that a lot of mages tend to kind of forget about. Vigor, your HP stat, the stat that keeps you alive, drastically speaking. In the strength build video, I mentioned Vigor first and said that it is the most important stat, and I would say that it is still the most important stat, but Mage is a very stat intensive build, so you will most likely not get it all the way up to 60, even though you should get as close to it as possible. You can see that with 55 Vigor I have 1814 HP, which is definitely less than 1900 something, but I would say it's playable. On this right side of the stat page you can also see the spells that I have equipped, and you can see my very mediocre defensive capabilities. Because the mage has to keep his endurance stat quite low, I also cannot wear really heavy armor. So in total I'm sure that every mage has in common that it's mostly an offensive focused build. So let's quickly take a look at my inventory before the fun part begins. So in my first slot, as previously mentioned, mentioned, I have the Dark Moon Greatsword, or Moonlight Greatsword, as some Dark Souls players might accidentally call it. I also have a Banished Knight's Halberd with Loretta Slash, which is a very strong weapon art with a true combo. There's Moonveil, the magic katana that shoots moonbeams. I have Swords of St. Trina. I have just regular long swords, Shamshears with magic and frost affinity. The Glintstone Kriss, which is a very strong dagger that can shoot projectiles, and to round it off, a couple of fist and claw weapons. Those are just good on every build. As always, I have some Misericord daggers for riposts, and as a quick swap option with Dodge Ashes of War. I also obviously have a couple of staffs. I have a lot of rows of the same item in order to make fast inventory swaps easier. And the final row is a couple of parry shields. Next, let's quickly go over a couple of talismans. Obviously, the talismans are going to be situational depending on what you're doing right now. For example, the Graven Mask talisman will greatly raise the damage of your spells, while the Radagon icon will increase your cast speed. The Godfrey icon boosts charged spells and also skills, such as the Alexander Shard, which boosts skills in general, and the Magic Scorpion charm boosts magic damage in general. Since we're rather lightweight, we might want to use the Bull Goat's talisman occasionally in order to boost our poise. Millicent's prosthesis and other flat stat boosting talismans might be useful to reach the minimum requirements of some weapons. And last but not least, we might want to have some defensive talismans in order to make up for our light armor, and stuff like the Great Jar Arsenal to be able to at least carry some armor into our weapons, despite our relatively low endurance stat. For the Dark Moon setup, I like the Axe talisman as well, because the R2 is a very strong one on this weapon, and if you manage to land a fully charged one, it can almost one-shot people, at least people who forgot to level Vigor. Okay, that much for the build. So lore-wise, since we are doing Rani's quest line in order to get the Dark Moon Greatsword, we're kind of competing with Blade the Half-Wolf, and this leads to sort of a rivalry, more or less open rivalry that lets you fight him a couple times during the game. He is Rani's original follower, and he's kind of afraid that you're gonna replace him. But we're not here for fighting PvE, it's time for PvP. So the first weapon I want to showcase, as you've already seen, is the Dark Moon Greatsword. It's a very unique weapon, first of all because of its Ash of War. You kind of charge your weapon with this Ash of War and then push regular R2 in order to release this beam of moonlight. So everything that boosts the weapon skill, like the Alexander Shard, everything that boosts charged skills, like the Godfrey icon, and everything that boosts charged R2s, like the Axe talisman, will boost this attack. Also, since the release of Elden Ring, great swords have not really been a very strong weapon class. The Moonlight Greatsword has only been buffed ever since, has never been nerfed. It has frost build-up, but they did not get the frost build-up nerf for dual wields because it's, you know, a single weapon. It did, however, get all the buffs that greatswords got in terms of hyper armor, and now this charged R2 is a menace. You never want to trade with it. I've personally always been a greatsword enjoyer. I also like the Claymore a lot, and I also have a Claymore on this build, a magic Claymore with piercing fang, but the Moonlight Greatsword, or Dark Moon Greatsword, excuse me, is just so strong on a mage. It has frost build-up, it has the projectile, it has an incredibly powerful R2 that just outtrades everything if you just have enough poise or hyper armor to trade. Okay, I'm sure you understood. The Dark Moon Greatsword is very good, but it's by far not the only thing that mages have going for them. There's also a ton of spells that you can use, like for example this Cannon of Haima, which is a very cool spell. It can knock people off their feet, but I'm not very good at free aiming it. In this occasion I would have rather had a great bow, but it didn't really matter for this guy because he took himself out. The next weapon I'm going to showcase is a rather hated one. It's the magic katana Moonveil. I would say it is hated for a couple of good reasons. It deals absurd amounts of damage with its Ash of War. It has a gigantic range. It's super fast. It also has bleed, like all katanas. It's basically a superb all-round weapon. A lot of people have been saying that it makes sense that since From Software is a Japanese studio, that they would make the most overpowered weapons in the game katanas. Like in the beginning it was Rivers of Blood and Moonveil, arguably some of the most unbalanced weapons in the game. And Rivers got some pretty decent nerfs for balance, and Moonveil really did not, so it's still pretty unbalanced if you ask me. So I personally don't really like to use it, but for the purpose of this video obviously I did, to showcase it. because it's definitely a weapon that belongs into the meta category for mages. You are seeing a nice mage off. For the most part it was a Dark Moon mirror match, but this guy is kind of being a little bit too passive for my taste, and he's also healing. So I'm gonna just switch to Moonveil. You'll see the difference in agility and just raw damage output. He just cannot counter such a fast weapon with his Dark Moon Greatsword because he has no poise, so he won't be able to force trades unless he would be very laggy. The next clip shows a very amazing duel. It got super close. I am using the halberd with the Loretta slash Ash of War, although I'm not gonna use the Ash of War in this clip. I'm not gonna spoil what happens. So my opponent, the Doom Shroom, also changes to a halberd, and he's abusing my very predictable attack pattern there, this attack after the roll, to land a parry. And now I'm very close to dying, so every hit of him could finish me off. So I also equip a parry shield in order to maybe land a clutch parry to close things out for me. And then I land this super close jumping attack on the backswing. And I predict his second attack, land the parry, swap to the dagger, and take him out. What an amazing duel. This is very deserving of a bow. Next up we have another duel. This time it's a mage mirror, once again. I'm fighting against this other mage who even looks quite similar to me. They're just not wearing any armor really, rather just a robe. And they're also using the Dark Moon Greatsword. But they're rather focused on range magic, and I'm using the Karen Retaliation parry in order to kind of send their magic back at them. This is another reason why I don't really like range spells that much, because they can be countered with a few options like Karen Retaliation or the Earth Tree Great Shield. So I'm rather searching for close combat encounters, but the other mage is doing a good job at keeping their distance. So now I decide to also take my stuff out and use the Swift Glintstone Shard, which is the fastest projectile in the mage arsenal, to counter his spells. And I even shot him out of his moon there. He was trying to do one of those moon moves, but I countered it by shooting him before he could execute it. And now finally it's time to show my offensive capabilities with the Loretta Slash. This pole arm specific move has a true combo, so if you get hit by the first swing, you also get hit by the second one. And it deals just absurd amounts of damage, if you have the intelligence for it, that is. In this clip we see a 2v2 happening, and both sides have a mage. I'm already focusing down the mage of the host side, but then the host comes in. He seems to be a Faith build and sprays his wave of gold at me, and then the teammate gets, I guess, probably an accidental hit on me, and I have to regroup. And the mage is spamming a lot of area denial moves, like this rain. In combination with the waves of gold, it's rather not a good idea to run into that. So I'm trying to surprise them from the other side, once again using the Cannon of Haima. And now my teammate and I kind of get the perfect situation where each one of us is able to focus down one of them, because their biggest advantage is that they don't have friendly fire. If they stand close to each other, it's much harder to find an opening to attack. And we both take out our opponent pretty much at the same time and win the invasion together. The next invasion started as a 3v1 kind of. There were two phantoms with the host, but none of the phantoms actually made it to this area. So I'm fighting 1v1 with the host right now, and I'm using the Death Ritual Spear, immediately followed by the Glintstone Chris. Both of which are insanely overpowered weapons in my opinion. Both of them have the ability to summon very strong projectiles. The spear is summoning this kind of rain of spears, and the Glintstone Chris, as you're gonna see in a second, it's summoning a Comet Shard-like projectile, and it's also following it up with a thrust attack. It's like a super buff version of the Ash of War Glintstone Pebble, if you know that one. Alright, this wouldn't be a complete meta build showcase if I wouldn't also make my way to the Colosseum and do some arena duels at meta level and hope for some nice opponents, and maybe not one and the same opponent over and over. So the first duel I get is a meta dex build, as it seems. He's using the Urumi, which is a sword whip, or a whip sword, whatever way you want to call it, with lightning grease on it in order to boost its damage even more. This is a very good setup. I'm also using this setup a lot on my meta dex build. I'm not really sure how to counter it because I don't have that much poise. And suddenly something really weird happens. I hit him with the R2 and it kills him, but he also gets a backstab. That's a lag shenanigans moment right there. Because of how the Colosseum works, the winner is the one who touches the ground last. So it even counts as their win, even though technically I killed them first. But well, who cares? Most arena fights are pretty easy wins anyway. Exhibit A. Next up, it's time for a match against another mage. It's even another Dark Moon Greatsword user. But they are also focusing on casting some range magic in advance. And there we go, trading some blows. There they use the Carrion Piercer, one of those Carrion sword sorceries. And that was Adula's Moonblade. It's a frost sword spell that also shoots a frosty projectile. But while he was using this big frost sword, I just sniped him with a swift Glintstone shard and finished him with it. Here we see a pure caster build, although it's not an intelligence-based caster, it's a faith build, or arcane faith for that matter. He's using the Catch Flame spell, which is kind of a small fireball that comes out of your hand. Therefore has a very small range, but it's pretty strong and can combo into itself and into other things very nicely. This time it seems like the guy went AFK or something, even though there was not even a minute of delay between those two fights that you just saw. Maybe he just wanted to be edgy and react in the very last moment and then forgot to react at all. This next person has a pretty cool build. They have like a small hand axe with Blood Flame on it. The Blood Flame blade buff will increase your bleed meter after a hit, so it makes it much harder to roll through a bleed proc. But I'm spacing him and using the Loretta Slash and following it up with some Carrion Slicer magic. The Carrion Slicer, as the Carrion Piercer or the Carrion Greatsword, are sword sorceries for close combat. And now it's time to present the climax of this video. The legend of Old Man Senpai. As always, Elden Ring thought it would be funny to keep matching me with the same person forever and ever. And in this case, I really enjoyed myself because the person I was up against was this person with only a dot as its name, so I gave him the fitting name Old Man Senpai. And it's very cool, I like fighting this guy. Because he's very polite, he's always bowing in the beginning, and so am I. And the fights are not really close most of the time. At first I kept using the halberd and combining it with the Carrion Slicer. And well, it didn't really end well for him. He had a sword and board setup. Sometimes he would also swap to a curved sword instead of his straight sword, but always keeping the shield in his offhand. And I'm not really sure what he was really using the shield for, because he did not parry. He also never used any Ashes of War, so he was only using like regular sword and board play. Not necessarily bad, but also not necessarily very effective. So I'm starting to mix up my setups. Now I'm using the curved sword, Shamshir, instead of the Carrion Slicer. He's decently good at dodging those slower weapon arts though. So I keep changing my setups. This time I'm using the double Saint Trina swords. They have a very unique effect, which is that they cause sleep buildup on hit. And so I'm just trying to have fun with Old Man Senpai, and then I'm putting him to sleep, but I'm not even comboing into it, because I'm just jumping around in pleasure. I swear those are not password duels. I'm not friends with this guy, at least previously I wasn't, but I must say I like their style a lot. So I keep using all sorts of different setups. This time I'm using a claymore. which, as I already said, is one of my favorite weapons in general, and I use it on pretty much every build. Next up, I'm using a heavy thrusting sword. There I use the charge R2 backstep. This is quite an advanced maneuver, I would say. And I already dealt enough damage so that I know that some of those projectiles are for sure going to take him out. So I'm just kind of trolling a little bit, or like making fun of the situation, I guess. Oh, I'm sorry, Senpai. Well, now I finally chose a weapon which is really shitty. It's this kind of glass soldier sword. I don't really know what it's called. It's the rotten version, so in theory I could rot him with it. But I'm also trying to parry with my offhand shield. And my sword is way shorter than his now. So if he plays his cards right, there we go. He gets his first win against me. Very well done, old man Senpai. And I'm even jumping for joy for him in the next duel, because obviously I keep getting matched with him over and over and over again for whatever reason. I don't know why this always happens to me. At least in this case I'm getting matched with a nice guy. So now we're basically having a mirror match. I chose the same sword that he also has. So it's a sword and board mirror, but this time with equally long swords. And it's actually a pretty good fight, I would say. I'm trying to catch him there with Piercing Fang, but I don't land it. And so it takes some jump attack trickery to get him into my range. And take him out once again. And at this point I'm slowly running out of moderate setups. And I also don't want him to think that I am just going easy on him. So I'm using Moonveil. I'm sorry, Senpai. And finally, I used my Magic Raptor Talons, which are, well, just pretty broken at the moment. So they're pretty good on every build, I would say, because they have a very brutal true combo. And I'm just taking him out in 2 hits. And I'm waving because I'm going to quit the arena for this day, and it's also my last clip. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my fights with Senpai and the video in general. If you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Helps me getting monetized at some point. The music in today's video was from Super Mario Galaxy, which is kind of fitting in my opinion because all the sorcery stuff lore-wise is very star and galaxy themed. So once again, thanks for watching and have a good one. See you next time.